So welcome everyone. It's good to be back. I'm sorry I missed you all last week. I was up in Denver traveling with my teenage daughter. And so just a couple quick announcements. This week I'll be traveling on Wednesday, so no meditation this Wednesday, which is the 24th. And I'll also be traveling on Sunday the 28th. So the next satsang on April 28th. I won't be here. So it's nice to be here, and happy Easter to everyone. I thought we'd just take a couple minutes and just go inward. Be silent. And just feeling your body. Feeling your presence. Just feeling into this great mystery of being human. Because it really is. It really is. As we're coming into spring, spring is a time for rebirth, renewal. And so if you just feel into your body, I invite you just to feel the aliveness of your body, the divinity of your body, the presence that's here. And so many of us, we spend our lives in our minds, struggling, fighting. It's nice just to let that all fall away. Just let it drop. And this evening I'm going to invite you, to invite the presence of Christ. This rebirth, this resurrection. Basically, we're inviting something greater to come into us. A greater experience of God or the Holy Spirit or Christ, or a greater experience of oneself. Our life can be so hard and so confusing. With the promise of the resurrection, it's a promise of rebirth, of stepping into a new life. A new life. And so we're giving ourselves permission, just to breathe, to feel, to experience. And again, it's wherever we identify within our consciousness. That's what our world becomes. So if you identify with your mind, if you identify with your ego, your personality, some people, they identify with their hairstyle. If that's what you are, you make your world quite small. And the gift of rebirth, of resurrection, it's saying, I'm letting go of this old life and I'm being born again, born anew in the divine. And we're being born again with spirit. Spirit in the forefront of our consciousness, not in the back seat, but in the forefront. And all of us, we have this potentiality. We have the potential to live in our egoic nature and struggle, live in our thinking mind and just eternally plan our life. or fight with or argue or avoid. But satsang is a time when we come together and we're remembering that all of us can be reborn in Christ, in Christ consciousness. And you don't have to be religious to experience this. You don't have to be Christian. But it's a willingness to let go into your highest. Unfortunately, so many of us, we identify with the lowest. And that's how our mind is programmed, to identify with the lowest, or to identify with problems. Because when we identify with problems, our mind is telling us at least we'll be safe if we know all the problems which are present. But there's great freedom in, identifying with the hugeness of what we are. The hugeness. This morning I got up, and after the Easter bunny had come, and we'd done the Easter egg hunt, with my 5-year-old, who was very excited. I told my wife that I wanted to just go on a little bike ride, and I guess it wasn't a little bike ride, it was a bigger bike ride. My older daughter and I are doing a big bike race at the end of the month. It's 50-something miles over a couple of big passes, mountain passes here in Colorado. It starts in Durango and goes to Silverton. So, there's part of me that knows I better, hop on the bike and get, start training some more. And, I live on the side of a mountain, about halfway up, and so the pedaling was it's just straight up. I mean, that's the only direction there is. And so I got on the bike, and my body wasn't super excited, to be on it and just to be pedaling uphill. That's a perfect time for the mind to complain. But I just noticed how big the sky is. How blue it is, how vast. I looked to my right and saw these huge white-capped snowy mountains. And I just pedaled uphill. And normally I ride a mountain bike, but I guess I love anything with two wheels. But on road bikes, there's cars there, so it's a little bit more noisy. But what I was noticing was just how big my consciousness was. And when you're pedaling on a road bike up a mountain, you're not going very fast. But there's cars that, might fly by you going anywhere between, 70 miles an hour, or maybe only 40 miles an hour, depending on, how big the engine is, if they can go fast up the hill. And so I was just hearing the sound of the cars. And it felt as if the cars were just driving through my consciousness. So when you give yourself permission, to let go into the hugeness, let go into the silence, and be the silence, it feels as if almost like life is happening in you. In you. There's this old saying, Be still. Be still and know you are God. And so what's the experience of God? Oh, God is vast. God contains all. God is not just one little being in some hidden place in the universe. We are made in the image and likeness of God. And so you have the opportunity to let go into your hugeness, to be this hugeness. And it's an interesting thing. It makes for quite a life to live this paradox of being human and divine. My human self was struggling to pedal up a mountain. And my divine self, as big as the sky. As big as the sky. And so I was experiencing this hugeness, and I was reflecting on the life of Jesus and how it was, a little bit different than, or maybe vastly different than the life of the Buddha. And we have these two great archetypal saints. Buddha started a monastic tradition. Christ was in the world. The beauty of Christ is that he gave himself to life. He gave himself to life fully. So many people on the spiritual path are just trying to get out of life, avoid life, escape life. And we can cause ourselves great suffering trying to escape. An addiction to drugs or alcohol or, Facebook or whatever it is that people are addicted to. Oftentimes humans are just trying to escape. Escape. When I was with my daughter, my older daughter up in Denver, at the university there, they gathered all the parents together like in a big auditorium, and we were going to just be able to ask questions about financial aid and this and that. And I was kind of sitting in the back, it was one of those like multi-tiered, auditoriums where you're looking up high. And I noticed that there was so many parents like not listening, just like, they just had their phones and they were just scrolling through their phones while these college admission deans were speaking. And I was actually quite surprised how many people, were checked out, were escaping. I'm going to go twice to the big city. But I was just surprised. I saw people walking in the street, like crossing streets, staring at their phone, walking through traffic. Just lost in this sense of avoidance. But see, Christ was, he was fully joining with life. I smile because he got in so much trouble, so much difficulty. And this path, that I teach, it's not a path of avoidance. It's a path of jumping into. If you can see, behind me in this great Tonka, this is what you face. There's this flaming goddess of life. And she challenges you when you come into the world. She challenges you. But above her, you can't fully see. Let me see if I can tilt the cameras up a little higher. Maybe I can. If you look a little higher, there's some Buddhas up there above her. And that's what she's showing us, is that when you walk through her, when you walk through the challenge, through the difficulty, through your current struggle. Whatever that struggle may be, you discover a greater aspect of your divinity. Whether that be fearlessness, or your goddess nature, your absolute strength, absolute freedom. And when we all die, we can experience, freedom till the end of time in heaven. But the great question is can we be free here on earth? In order to be free in earth, in form, in matter, we have to give ourselves. We have to show up. We have to say yes. When someone says, I'd like to give you some constructive feedback, maybe it's not so constructive. Are we willing to say yes? Are we willing to look at our wound, our shadow, our heartache, our despair, our confusion, and say yes? And open to this and free the darkness so that greater peace, greater freedom can embody this place. And so it's to the degree that you're open with life. It's to the degree that you're open with God. But most of us, we have a spirituality that tries to close off life and find God through the path of renunciation. And that path may have worked in the past, but if we want to be free in the world, if things are going to change, if we're going to stop shooting each other and bombing each other, like that tremendous terrorist attack that happened today, we have to learn to love. We have to learn how to work with reconciliation. We have to learn how to make peace. Make peace. Give birth to peace here on planet Earth. And all this starts with ourselves. And for so many of us, it starts with how you talk to yourself. Are you kind to yourself? Are you gentle? Are you loving? Do you look in the mirror and say, hello, beautiful? Hello, God. Hello, God. My teacher, he told me this funny thing. He lived in New York City for a long time, and he had a psychic come to one of his classes once, and she said, David, in a previous lifetime, you were St. Francis. And he looked at her and kind of shrugged it off. I was like, yeah, sure, And, but then he just sat with it for a little bit. And he just thought to himself, like, what if I was? Can I look in the mirror and see St. Francis looking back? Could I give myself permission to be St. Francis for a day? So instead of listening to the internal critic, which is always telling us you are less than, can you give yourself permission to be great, greater than? And not greater than others, but greater than what you previously knew yourself to be. See, because so much suffering, if not all suffering, is at least mental, emotional suffering, is created from where we identify within ourselves. We identify with, I'm small, I cannot do this. I can't handle life. I'm ugly, I'm overweight, I'm too old, too young. I'm not the boss, I need to be the boss. Whatever it is that people identify with. If I had some extra letters after my name, then I could be happy. If we identify with something small, we suffer. But when we identify with something quite large, our body responds. We start to feel freedom in the cells of our being. Our consciousness expands. And that internal critic dissolves. Dissolves. My whole life I thought I was quite small. I was afraid to speak. Now I have a job speaking all the time, which is quite funny. But I had to face my demon, my shadow, which was, I'm not good enough. I have nothing to say. Someone else can say it better. I can remember. I think I told this story before, but I'll tell it again. That when I first started teaching, my teacher had for many years been training me to teach, and said, Craig, you should start, offering some workshops. And I said, okay. And I rented a little, like a little room in a community building downtown, and rented another room at the Dharma Center. And there was a fellow in the group who, he looked at me and he said, hey, Craig, I hear you're teaching now. And I said, yeah, I've been offering some classes. And he looked at me, he said, well, we don't need any more meditation teachers, He said, there's already enough Buddhist teachers, and we have David here. And I just felt like my throat chakra closing up. I felt this fear come forward in my consciousness. And I felt this great sadness and heartache in myself. And this was actually one of my good friends. And I came to find later that he wanted to teach, and anyways, I guess maybe he was a little jealous or envious, or he was showing me his wound, his fears, his confusion. It had nothing to do with me, what he was telling me. Just like when people would spit on Christ, when they threw rocks at him, when they nailed him to a cross, it had nothing to do with him. It had everything to do with the people, who were spitting and throwing rocks. They were hurting. They were greatly suffering in their consciousness. Christ looked at them and said, I forgive you. And forgive them, Lord. They know not what they've done, what they do. Because this is the truth, that people don't know what they're doing. My friend, he had no idea why he was attacking me. He didn't realize his own jealousy, his own heartache. It took me a long time to see that, Many years later, he actually built a retreat center and started teaching. And I saw, he was just jealous. He was envious of what I was doing and my success. And it's good to remember this, that, that so many of our brothers and sisters here on planet Earth, they're deluded, they're confused. When someone says something mean to you, when someone's being angry, when they're throwing rocks, it's because they're suffering. It's not because there's something wrong with you. Unless you've done something horribly rotten, but most of us haven't done anything horribly rotten in a long time. Most of the time people are offering us feedback about where they are at in their level of consciousness. They're looking at us saying, hey, I'm in pain, and so I'm going to yell at you or judge you or attack you or whatever it is. Whatever it is. And so when we know this about others, like if our wife's giving us a hard time, our children, our kids, our parents, our husband, our partner, whoever it is, our boss, if they're giving us a hard time, it's because they are suffering. Because they are suffering. And see, we start to grow in love. We start to grow in compassion when we see that most of the time people are communicating, not about us, but, about themselves. I hate you means my heart is closed. I'm really, I'm really suffering. I'm really suffering. And so, like my good friend Todd Rice is writing, that insecurity is powerful. When people are insecure, they greatly suffer, and they attack and they blame and they're vicious. And it's just heartbreaking to see this. But you stay strong, you stay empowered when you know this about your friends here on planet Earth, that they might be insecure, and that's why they're acting this way. That's why they're throwing insults at you or your neighbor. Sometimes I've hung out with people where, they sit and gossip about someone else who's not present in the friend group and just go on and on and on. And, it's like this disease that people have of insecurity. But this disease is healed through self-love, through knowing thyself. Knowing thyself. Unfortunately, one of the greatest ways to know thyself is to spend some time in silence. But I say unfortunately because often if we are suffering and we spend time in silence, we realize how much pain we're in. And so then we avoid that pain through, I guess the most common way now is the cell phone. So we don't even give ourselves permission to be totally silent, totally unplugged. We don't give ourselves permission, to go through that resurrection of stepping into a new world. A new world, because so many of us are afraid. Afraid of what's within us. Afraid of the outside world and then afraid of the inside world. But see this path, again, very much like the Tonka behind me. We must face our demons. We must face our fears. We must face this inner insecurity and respond with love, respond with compassion. And as we do so, love grows. This experience of freedom grows. This experience of divinity grows. I can remember the first time I sat down to meditate, I was 14 years old, and I would just sit there. I'd bend my legs in the full lotus and and twist my body like a pretzel and sit, with perfect Zen-like posture. And right away, I just felt this inner warmth, this inner aliveness and divinity. I just thought, what is this? What's waking up in me? And then through the years, for, I guess that's been 30 years, there's been all kinds of distraction, all kinds of drama, all kinds of pain and confusion. But I just continued to pay attention to that inner divinity. And it grew and grew and grew. Until it became an inner bonfire. Until it became my predominant experience. And was it hard? Yeah. My friends were, chasing girls and doing lots of drinking, smoking lots of pot, and lots of messing around. And there was times when I, really messed around. But I always just came back to the silent truth. The kingdom of heaven is within. Is within. And so I dedicated my life to continuing to open to this. Discover, is it true? Is there a kingdom in here? And what I found is there's not one kingdom, like as Jesus said, there's many mansions in my Father's house, like many realms of divinity, many realms. And so can you take the time to discover these? Discover the hugeness of what you are. The hugeness. So anyways, it's good to see you all. Let's see if there's any questions. I had some emailed questions, but of course, if there's anyone here that wants to ask one, you're welcome to. Oh yeah, I forgot in the announcement section to give a big thank you to Lisa and Veronica and everyone else who offered donations supporting this webcast. But anyways, let's see. So thank you truly for your generosity. So I have an email here. Let me just take a moment. Okay, so here's a question from someone, and I apologize, I didn't write down their name. But this person writes that they had a incredible spiritual awakening, and lots of energy, moving through their body. They said they felt, incredible symptoms of kundalini, and the awakening became. This went on for about 15 years, and they said the awakening became more permanent about a year ago. And their question is, Craig, how did you deal with the complete dissolution of your personality and your entire life, and the entire life that was based on personality? It feels like I'm going through a personal judgment day, an internal apocalypse. I'm no longer able to relate to anyone or anything in my environment. The sense of isolation and complete disorientation has left me completely paralyzed, and I'm wondering, will there ever be an end to this? Yes, there will be an end to this. So let's speak about this, because in a real sense, especially people who speak about the resurrection of Christ and his full letting go into God consciousness is letting go through this doorway. And of course, the person writing this, they're writing in a very dramatic way. And so, there's times when we're on the spiritual path and it feels as if we're facing the death of ego, the complete dissolution of our identity. But the good news is, I used to be, well, let me back up. I used to be very dramatic about, this experience of awakening, but now I'm just really matter of fact about it. When you're in it, like when you're in the fire of it, when it's initially happening with you, it feels like, a complete and total end, that you'll be wiped completely blank and left in a permanent state of samadhi for the rest of your life. And, well, there is some truth to that. There's also this greater truth that, like a practical, grounded truth, that the only thing that God is wanting to take from you is that which is obsolete. That which is obsolete, that which no longer serves you. Yesterday, as I was building some shelves in my garage, and in that we were having to go through all of our junk and see what's junk. See what has to be given away. And I found out this old box of computer stuff. And I found one of these, I don't even know if I know what it's called, but it's a hub, a USB hub. That's what it's called. And, I looked at this hub and I said, oh, this is from 10, 12 years ago. I think this is USB 2, not USB 3. Like 3 is like the new speed, the fast speed. And I thought, oh, this is obsolete. I could no longer use this. It doesn't really serve a purpose. And see, this is, what the dissolution of ego is about. It's about just things that are obsolete in you. I invite you to happily let them go. Happily let them go. Not to see yourself as paralyzed, but, actually quite excited to let things go. To be quite excited. Spiritual awakening is you're waking up into a new world, a new realm of divinity. The only thing you're asked to let go of is that which doesn't serve you, that which you don't need. Sometimes God takes everything away at once and leaves us, a little bit comatose. The reason she does that is so that we get the picture of who the boss is, what reality is. I can remember there was a time when I could, I had so much energy in my body I could barely walk. I was having seizures. My mind completely went blank. My memory fell away. And I'd look at people I knew. I couldn't remember their names. And in a real sense, it's still like that. In fact, I saw an old friend, actually a lady who used to work for me, and I saw her a couple hours ago, and I looked at her and I didn't know who she was. And she was pretty close. And it was funny. I almost thought she was my former wife. And so, imagine being so disoriented you couldn't even remember who you were married to. And so, I could see because she came up and started talking to me, like we were best friends. And I was like, who is this person? I know who it is. I should know who she is. And yeah, it can be disorienting, but if you just smile and just let go and trust, then it's not really an issue. Or it's more fun than it is traumatic or paralyzing. And so, going back to your question of how do I relate to, the person who's writing, normal people around you, normals in quotes. And by that, I mean, I think they mean non-spiritual or someone who hasn't walked through this doorway of awakening. I'll tell you the way I relate to everyone is I see them as God. I see them as God. So when true dissolution happens, you don't feel like you are awake and everyone else is asleep. You feel like everyone and everything is God. You see divinity everywhere, even in horrible people. Like people who do horrible things. The school shooter and the kids who were shot. You see it as God. One of them is, God being innocent, and the other one is God being confused. And it's brutal, it's heartbreaking, but you see God everywhere. You stop seeing hierarchies. You don't see that you live in a separate world, and that some people, that you don't see yourself as outside of life. You see yourself fully in life, that you are the fabric of life, that you are the fabric of life, and you feel it in a non-divisive way. And so, when we initially go through these stages of awakening, it's confusing, it's frightening, it's disorienting. Yeah, absolutely. But then, later on, it's just really normal. Normal in the sense that you see and feel that everything is God. The biggest change happens when you fully embrace pain and suffering and confusion and heartache. And you stop running from it. And I wouldn't even say stop being fooled by it, because, as human beings, there's always going to be some level of your humanity that we're fooled by, because the human self lives in an evolutionary world. So it's always evolving. But the more you embrace your heartache, your confusion, the more you'll find non-division everywhere. You'll just see non-division. So the death of division comes through embracing everything with love. With love. And so, thank you for your question. I can remember when I, first, felt this experience of the dissolving of the self. It was euphoric and spacious and blissful, and simultaneously it was like there was nothing there, like absolutely nothing. Very confusing to the nervous system, incredibly confusing. I still run into walls, by the way, which is, it's like, where does my body end and everything else begin? So, okay, she goes on to write, I'm finding it really difficult to live without desire, motivation, and attachment to anything. I know that those qualities stem from ego and create more suffering, but being without desire, motivation, and attachment feels like more like illness rather than a higher state of being. The only thing I'm able to do is meditate, and I simply don't know how to find balance in physical reality when all desire for anything worldly is completely destroyed, by this experience. I was born with high intelligence and many talents. All of them are completely wasted because I lack very basic egoic drive to use those talents. Yeah, so that's actually a great question. So sometimes God puts us in this state which just makes us blank. And in that blankness, what you'll find is all kinds of things are falling away. You won't even notice them fall away. They'll just empty out of you. I can remember a time I was walking down the street, and I just looked back behind me because I felt like I just lost like 2,000 pounds of karma off my back. Like it just fell away. And there's just such great freedom in that. But at the same time, I had no desire. There was a time when, I spent the good part of 2 years just sitting in my backyard, staring, laying on a couch, just, staring, kind of just like gazing, this willow tree dancing in the wind. There's a time, sometimes God comes to you and just takes you. But it's good to remember, we're not meant to be stuck here forever. It's just a phase of emptying out. Now, when you're in it, it feels like you'll never get out of it. And in a sense, you don't get out of it. But what starts to come forward is God's will starts to move through you. in you, as you. And so most people have, like 8 voices in their head. And the falling away of the ego is the dissolving of those 8 voices. But then eventually there's one true voice that comes forward, the voice of your heart, the voice of God. And you will use intelligence again, especially if you're gifted with a bright mind. But the intelligence will be hooked into divine intelligence instead of human intelligence. Human intelligence just like thinks about things and figures things and plans things and sorts things. It's very limited capability, capacity. Divine intelligence is the universe, the whole world. Great universes. Sometimes Einstein would get in touch with this. He said he'd just think about a problem. He couldn't figure it out. He just let it go. And then the answer would drop into him. So you will use your intelligence again. It'll be divine intelligence. And that's what God is wanting from you, Maya, is for you to surrender so deeply that you know how to listen. But it's important that we trust. It's like Christ, when he was looking at that cross, he's like, I don't know. I don't know about that thing. It looks like it hurts. But he's a man of God, so he chose to trust. Not run, but to trust. To let go, to surrender himself so fully, so totally, that something greater could come forward. Something greater. And of course, with the story of Christ, it's really dramatic. Incredibly dramatic. And it's a frightening experience for him. And so in a mythological way, say we can look at it, it's like, it's frightening for us to let go of our mind. I have a good friend who's listening now, and she's never studied yoga or anything, and as this awakening started to happen in her, her body started to go into spontaneous yogic asanas. And she gets up and spends a couple hours each morning while God is directing her body through these movements, through this very physical type of meditation that she's doing. And so she doesn't know what she's doing, but she just lets go. She just surrenders and steps into this because she trusts. And that's the doorway forward. The doorway forward is the doorway of trust. Of trust. If we want a new life, a new birth, if we want to be born again, we must trust in something greater. Something greater. One of my favorite teachings, came from motorcycle instruction, of when you're riding a bike, look where you want to go. Look in the direction you want to go. Going around a corner, look around the corner. Walk in this direction. It's a movement of trust. Don't look at that which, if you're going to get in an accident, don't look at the car you're going to hit or the guardrail or flying off the road. Look at where you want to steer the bike. Look for the space. In meditation, same truth. Look to the space. There was a time when I studied with Lama Tsultrim in the Tibetan tradition. And each morning we'd hike up this ridge and sit on the top of this, this mountain ridge, and we just look out at the vast blue sky. Look out at the vast blue sky. Feel awareness. and feel it in a 360 way. So just giving itself permission to be big, to be vast, to just explode open in every direction. And that's why these walls, these walls here are painted blue. In the Tibetan temple that I was studied at. The top room of the temple is called the Dharmakaya. It's painted all these shades of blue because we practice the Prajnaparamita meditation, just staring at the vast, empty sky. The Buddha spoke about sky-like mind, vast, empty, free, and yet pregnant with all phenomena. That everything is this vast spaciousness, this emptiness, this freedom. And so it's beautiful, just to let go. To let go into this emptiness. Or to experience the hugeness of what you are. Outside my window, across the way, there's a little creek, and there's some birds, chirping in the distance. And so we're just feeling into that and just noticing. Like, am I separate from this bird? How big is my consciousness? Does my consciousness include the sound of the bird? And where is this sound arising from, if not from within me? From within me. And so we're giving ourselves permission. And just to let go into the hugeness that you are. The hugeness. And so I invite you to close your eyes or just feel. Feel the radiance of your being. Experience this inner love of your heart. This vast, empty consciousness. This radiant love. Smile. You inwardly smile and be born again. Born again this moment. Can you give yourself permission to allow this column of grace, this divinity to pour down into you, to flood you? Can you call upon God and say, God, will you flood me with your grace, with your light, with your love? Will you flood me? Will you bring forth a higher mind? Will you flood this heart with brilliance? And all that's required is you relax. You give yourself permission to relax and to let go. And receive this grace. Receive the Holy Spirit. Receive this divine light in you as you. So simply breathing, feeling, and saying yes to your divinity. Yes. Yes to the Most High. Yes. And so it's so good to be here with you all. Just to sit in this grace, to sit in this light, to sit in this love. And I see one last question here at the end that my good friend Todd is asking. So much love to you, Todd. It's been a long time. He's writing with the political bull going on and the people in your life that spew that venom. How do you recommend dealing with them? Cut them out, ignore them. So how does this presence that you are, this divinity that you are, that we're experiencing now, how does it respond? And if your neighbor wants to argue, does this divinity want to argue back? Does it want to fight? If they, are spitting venom on us, do we want to spit venom back? Maybe our ego does. The biggest thing that I see that people are suffering, especially when they're talking politics, and they're not ready to listen. They don't want to listen. They just want to tell you where you're wrong. So instead of arguing, oftentimes I just give them permission to be them. But in order to give them permission to be them, I have to see that, that they're struggling, that they are suffering, that they're suffering. They're suffering. And so I acknowledge that. I acknowledge that they are living with this disease of division. And so if my heart tells me in the moment to speak to them with love, I do. I normally don't argue because it's often a waste of time. Sometimes I've found myself even agreeing with what they're saying, just to help them to open, help them to relax. So many people fight because they feel like they're not being heard, and they're throwing out, their politics because they feel like they're not being heard. Sometimes if we look them right in the eyes and listen to them fully, what you'll notice is that their energy starts to relax. And then if you feel like sharing some of your perspective, you can. Or sometimes we're just silent. Because arguing, it just doesn't seem to lead anywhere. It's not what our country needs. It's not what our world needs. We don't need to argue. We don't need to fight. What we need to see is, how can we work together? And sometimes it means we ignore the politics. We ignore the fight. We ignore the struggle. And respond with love. When I see most politicians, I see they're suffering, greatly insecure, and trying to shove their perspective down your throat. There's great suffering there, great heartache there. When my friends and family are doing that, again, I just tend not to go there. Of course, I show up and vote. I send letters to my political representatives almost every day, through email. And then the big thing I try to do is to see how I can do good work in my world, in my family, in my community, and spread a message of hope, of good news. And that's what Christ was truly about, was good news. There is another way. Sometimes it starts with forgiveness, and sometimes we just need to forgive our fellow humans for being human, and forgive the Russian, bots online. Forgive them for being Russian, for whatever it is. So anyways, Much love to you all. Looking forward to seeing some of you at my retreat coming up next week, starting Thursday in Encinitas. Of course, if anyone wants to come last minute, you're welcome to join us. There's some scholarships available if money's an issue. And thank you all for your generous donations and supporting the satsang. And if you'd like to make a donation, you can do so at craigholiday.com. And before we end, I just want to say hi to everyone. I'll say hi to, I'm going to look at, I have two screens here. So I see Ori. Ori, I hope I said your name right. And Chad and Don and Lisa and Denny and Ron and Marianne and Shauna and Tree. Who else is here? Yeah, I think that's everyone there. And then, of course, over here, Suzanne and Ivy, Michelle, Adriana, Carlos, Thane, Tabula, Paul, Todd, so good to see you. Linda, Antonio, Casey, Michelle, Adrian in New York, Cesare, Katie. So good to see y'all. And Suzanne, thank you so much, Suzanne, for all the hard work you do for us and, putting all this together for us. So looking forward to seeing you all, and may y'all have a wonderful evening and happy Easter. Share your love. Share your heart with the world. Don't argue, don't fight. Share your goodness, your divinity. You are a gift. So many of us, we forget this. We forget this. May peace be with you all. Good night.